All right. Hey guys. Okay, so we are going to finish off that crust that we did. I'm going to make an apple pie, so I'm going to talk to you about the filling ingredients. It is about 8 medium-sized apples. So if you have less than that, or if they're smaller than that, you're going to have to use more. It really depends on how deep your pie dish is. So this was just like about an inch and a half. So 8 apples, and you want to use crispy ones. Really depends on how you want it to taste. So I use Macintosh, but a lot of recipes call for Granny Smith. Those are very tart apples. And then other apples that you could use would be like Pink Lady or Fuji or Gala, Honeycrisp. All of those are really crisp apples. So, like I said, I use Macintosh. I use ones that are really crisp. Sometimes they're not as crisp, so you need to be careful. If you use a mushy apple, it's just going to end up being like applesauce, and you don't want that inside of your pie. So, I actually have an apple peeler. That's what I used here. So, I'll show you guys what that looks like. They're not necessary, but they make your job a lot quicker. So, this is my apple peeler. All you do is you do this. So, you're going to I'll push this down so you guys can see it. But you put the apple right here, just stick it in right in the middle, and then just spin the end. And as it goes through here, this part peels it, and then over here is going to slice it as it goes through, and it cores it as well. So it really quickens the job. The other thing you can use is a vegetable peeler to peel your apple, or a paring knife. And then you want to have about a 1/4 inch piece, smaller pieces, and they're going to end up looking kind of like this. Okay. There is also 1/2 cup of brown sugar, 1/2 cup of white sugar. There is 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, and that's to keep your apples from getting brown. There's a 1/4 of a cup of flour, and that's to help thicken up the inside. That's what we call a thickener. Other thickeners that are used in pie making are cornstarch and tapioca flour. Any of those work. Cornstarch and the tapioca flour are going to keep the filling clear. So if you're making a berry pie and you're worried about how the inside of it looks, you would want to use one of those. Flour keeps things cloudy, but with apples it would be cloudy anyway. So it doesn't really matter. There's a teaspoon of cinnamon in this, and I'm pretty sure that's it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you guys how to roll out your pie crust. Ooh, I thought something was falling off my arm. Okay. So here's my pie crust. You guys saw when I made this. All I did was I refrigerated it. I wrapped up my discs separately into saran wrap. Then I put them in my gallon-sized bag just to transport them. But they're still cold. So that's how you want it. Okay. I'm going to gently or generously flour my countertop, and I'm going to start rolling out my pie crust with my rolling pin. Okay, so you also want to make sure that the top and bottom of your pie crust are floured, because the last thing you want is your crust to stick to your counter, because then you end up with a mess. You can always brush this off as you go, so you don't have dry crust, but you want to start doing it gently, because as you can see, it cracks pretty easily. You want to keep even pressure, and you want to keep it in a circle. Whatever you do one way, you got to do the other way. And you just want to keep turning it, or make sure that the direction of your rolling pin is changing so that you're not getting an uneven shape. Right, and so far we've been lucky because it's not sticking to the counter. So that's good. And you'll kind of be able to tell when it starts to stick because it's not going to be moving freely. So see, it's kind of starting to stick now right in the middle. So I'm going to stop. And I'm actually going to just turn it over. Put a little bit more flour down. Put a little bit more flour on top. And you can even flour your rolling pin if you want. Sometimes that helps. I'm just going to keep rolling till I get a size that will fit in the inside of my pie pan so that there's still a little bit of overhang over the edges. You don't really need to worry about how the bottom crust looks because nobody really sees that one. You know, so if it comes apart, if it starts to fall apart a little bit, you can always patch it. And then once I brush this off, I want to show you guys the separate chunks of butter in there. You can really see them now. So how do you know if you've rolled it out enough? Some people have a silicone baking mat that shows them, you know, like the size that it should be rolled out for a 9-inch pie crust. And then they roll it out on there. Okay, but what I do is I just kind of set my pie pan on there and I can see that I have plenty for it to go up the sides and hang over the edges. I'm actually going to roll it out just a little bit more just to be safe because there are some pieces here that are not even. And then when I'm done, I'll set it in the refrigerator so that my pie crust stays cold and I will roll out the top half. And I'm going to show you guys how to transfer this to keep it from falling apart more on you because when it starts to get thin, it cracks easily and it falls apart. So there's a couple ways you could do this. You can roll it up on your rolling pin or you could fold it in half and then fold it in half again that way and pick it up. I like to fold it onto the rolling pin. However, if your pie crust is kind of sticking together, that's not good because it'll just keep sticking together. All right, so I'm going to roll it out of the way. And I'm going to gently lay it inside of my pie pan. And I'm just going to kind of work it down in there because you want it to be all up the sides like that. And we have a little bit of a, you know, it's falling apart a little bit here. So I'm going to show you guys how to fix that because it's kind of dry right now. So it's not going to stick together on its own. So all you need to do is get just a little bit of water on your finger and kind of like patch it together like that. Okay. So that's done. I'm going to put that one in the fridge. We're going to roll out the top and then I'll show you how to put the two together. Okay, so I have my second crust rolled out. I'm going to put the filling inside of the pie crust. And you guys can see there's quite a bit of liquid now because as fruit sits in sugar, it is called macerating. So what happens is it lets off liquid. Sugar draws the liquid out of the fruit, and then that's what you end up with. So I'm going to put all my apples in there because it looks like I have just enough. Just try not to go over top of the top part of your pie because if you do, then you run the risk of it leaking in the oven and making a huge mess. You don't want that. All right, so I have my apples in there. I have 2 tablespoons of butter just chopped up. That goes on top. Just spread it around. This is called dotting it with butter. All right, so I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to put my top crust on there. So if you wanted to, you could make this a lattice crust. And then in that case, you would cut this crust into 1/2-inch strips. And then there are plenty of videos on the internet that tell you how to do a lattice crust. But all you're going to do is you lay some of them like horizontally. And then you're going to take every other one and you're going to fold it back halfway. And then you're going to start to lay strips of pie crust vertically. Okay. And then so you do every other one. and that's how you make a lattice crust. But I will post a video on Google Classroom that shows you guys how to do it in case you're interested. All right, so I'm going to move this crust the same way I move the other one. Just going to roll it up on my pin very gently. You don't want to rip it. This is your top crust and you want it to be pretty. And then gently roll it over top. So actually, while the video was paused, I did a little bit of work with my bottom crust because I trimmed the bottom. So you only need to have about a ½ inch hanging over the edge because that's going to help you combine the two crusts, press them together, and then make a nice edge. Okay, so let me clean up my counter and then I'll show you guys how to do that. All right, so I am going to trim my top crust. Otherwise, we're gonna have a super thick part where they join together and you don't really need that. I'm just going around with my kitchen shears. You could use a knife too. All right, so I'm gonna get rid of that. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my top and bottom crust and I'm going to fold them into the pie pan. I'm gonna go around the edges and I'm gonna do that all the way around. I'm gonna make sure they're together. And I'm not pressing them together yet. I'm just preparing to do that. There's some different ways that you could press this together. Some people like to use a fork. Some people use their fingers. Some people have special instruments they use to make a fancy design on the edge. I just use my fingers, and there's a couple techniques that you could do with that. And I'll talk to you guys about that. So one way that you could go around your pie is you could kind of press like that. So this is going to be on the outside, and then you're going to press with these two fingers on the inside. The other way is what I do. I just kind of pinch them together and press them against the side at the same time. But then this is where, like I said, a lot of people use a fork. But you do want to make sure they're pressed together, otherwise they might end up coming apart on you while they're baking. Another thing that you need to make sure that you do before you put it in the oven is if you're not doing a lattice crust, so you're not doing the crisscrosses on top, you need to make sure that you poke holes in it with a fork or a knife because otherwise there's not going to be anywhere for the steam of the inside to escape, and it needs to escape. Otherwise, it's just going to end up making a huge hole in the top somewhere, and it's not going to be where you want it. Basically, it's for looks. Okay, so at this point, you can make a design with your knife, like some people, like to do whatever. Okay, do some around the edge. And then I'm going to brush mine with an egg wash. So all that is, it's one egg, a little bit of water, and I'm going to use my pastry brush. This is going to give it a nice golden brown finish and a little bit more of a crispy texture on top. If you don't want that, you could also use milk. That keeps it soft. But I personally like what the egg wash does. If you don't put anything on top, it's just going to kind of dry out. So you should use something on top, either an egg wash or the milk. Also, another thing you could do if you notice like these edges are starting to get burnt looking in the oven is you can cover just the edges with aluminum foil. And that's gonna, you kind of make like a collar. They even make special collars for around the crust of your pie so that it doesn't get burnt. So you could do that if you want, but I've honestly really never had that problem where that part gets burnt so badly that it's not good anymore. That's Bob in the background. Okay, that's good. You don't want it like super, wet on there with the egg, otherwise the top just ends up tasting like egg. So then another option you have is you can get some cinnamon sugar and just sprinkle it on top, or just regular sugar. I like to use cinnamon sugar because it's apples, but if you were just doing like a berry pie, then you might just want sugar or nothing. You don't have to put more sugar on it if you don't want. And then that's it. And then you put in the oven at 425 for about 15 minutes, and then you turn the temp down to, I believe it's 350 or 375 for an additional amount of time. The recipe, though, will be on Google Classroom, so you guys have the exact temperatures and times. Okay, but that is how you make apple pie. Um, any double crust pie like apple is going to be very similar to that. Just make sure you follow the instructions with the cook time and the temperatures and everything. Okay, hope you guys learned something.